Good evening and welcome to Italian Impact Podcast. I am your host, Steve Stefano Mancini, and I would like to welcome you to my first episode of the year 2025. And like all good listeners out there, if you're anywhere in the Northeast in the United States, you are probably sick like me. Not just sick of the cold, but just sick, good old-fashioned sick. So if I sound a little rough, it is not from New Year's Eve. It is just simply because I'm in Pittsburgh in January. With that being said, as always, I want to wish all of you a happy new year. 2025 brings a lot of new opportunities for all of us, and I hope you have a wonderful new year. And I know everyone out there has probably made a New Year's resolution, so don't quit it, no matter what it is. Stick with it, and I always say that, it's like running a race. If you quit once you get tired, you're never going to finish it, so just keep running through the fatigue, and you'll be all right. With that being said, I decided on this guest probably a month ago, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to ask her how we were introduced again because I can't even remember. But I do have a wonderful guest to start off the year 2025. Margaret Fontana. Margaret owns a media company, and she is right now in New Jersey. Margaret, how are you?
Hey, Steve. Good. Nice to finally connect with you, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And by the way, you know what? I'm not kidding. I cannot remember how we met. I'm just drawing a blank for some reason.
Well, I think we are just by default connected through the online world because of our Italian-American background.
There it is.
And so we are friends on Facebook, and we always like each other's posts, and everybody's supportive and that kind of thing. So I think that's how we kind of ultimately started connecting.
Margaret, I will tell you something funny. You know what? So I've been doing this, what I'll call this version of the show, probably coming up on 2 years now. And, Claudia and I did it. We were on the radio for a little while, and then we would also release it on podcasts, and then we went strictly podcasts, and Claudio left last year, so I continue to do the show. So in one form or another, this has been going on almost 2 years. And I have met so many people, and I will tell you what is funny is I try to look back and go, how did I meet? How do I know that person? And now I get to the point where I'm like, I've interviewed people, and I'm like, how do I know that? Oh, you interviewed them, 8 months ago.
Right,
it's like,
right.
Don't take it personal. I just don't remember names, Margaret. So I thought it was kind of funny.
No, I'm the same way.
No, it was funny. I was thinking, I was like, Margaret, I kept asking you for your number. I'm like, I hope to God I don't have her number in my favorites. And I kept looking, and I just couldn't find it.
How dare you not have my number in your favorites?
I know, right? I'm like, where the heck? Right? I know, but good times. Margaret, how the heck are you? How's your new year off to start?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, the new year 2025 is shaping up to be pretty great already. I think you were talking about our connection, and I think a lot of our connection stems from the Italian-American community. So for 2025, there's a lot going on. We had an amazing 2024 Italian Heritage Month that kind of led into this snowball of I think more of us connecting. And so I'm excited for what's to come in 2025. And, that encompasses, as you mentioned, I have a media company, Margaret Fontana Media. I also have a brand attached to Margaret Fontana Media, which is Italian American Girl, which is a Italian lifestyle blog, which I started back in 2008. And then fast forward a little, just because while we're still talking about Italian American, I'm also the executive director for the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission. So my plate is kind of full. And so 2025, we have a lot, but great initiatives. And one of the major things that I'm working on as well, which is also part of my media company, I also own Fontana Film Productions, which also houses any living history projects or media projects that I end up working on, and hopefully more for 2025. So, there's a lot going on, but it's exciting. There's, I think now more than ever, we are in this moment of media evolution, revolution. I think we're all kind of producers by default. We have all these tools at our fingertips. There's just so many interesting things going on. And, my background originally, if we go back many, many years, from college, I was in TV and radio. And, back then I always make that joke, it's TV and radio, and everybody's like, radio? Who does radio? But it was
I still
radio.
Enjoy radio for the record. Okay.
Right.
I just want to say that.
Exactly. Yeah. So from there, I ended up, getting one of my first internships working in television. And so I spent many years on the talk show circuit. I worked for Sally Jesse Raphael, if you remember her.
I do, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, she was like before Oprah, before everybody was like really super, high-end talk show. She was like one of the first Emmy-winning talk show hosts. So I was lucky enough to be on that show, I had different roles. I was, an audience coordinator. I was a production assistant. I mean, mind you, I started out as an intern, so that meant you do everything.
Right.
And,
including get the coffee. I get it.
Well, yeah, and I always give that story too because you know what? We never questioned if someone asked for coffee. You just kind of like, oh, okay, great, I'd be happy to.
Yep.
So fast forward, I spent a really long, great career. I had a lot of amazing mentors all throughout those years. And, I mentioned Sally, but she's like leading maverick, woman in the space who I learned a lot from. And, I ended up really having a great longevity inside of TV and then working more on the documentary side, working for the Discovery Channel. And then, fast forwarding over the years, I became more of like this marketing, communication, brand, PR, all of these things just started molding together. And you really, when you work in media and marketing, even if you're just a straight up film producer or a filmmaker, you kind of have to have all of these skills buttoned up or kind of put under one umbrella. And you do, if you're a filmmaker, you become a marketer, because you have to figure out how to market your film. If you're a filmmaker and you need to get out there and put your stuff out there, walk a red carpet, you become your own PR person. For me, I became a little bit more, kind of molded into all of these areas, and which I'm excited about because now as I look back on my career and all of the things that I've done, all of these things are just still very important, skills to have. So, where I am now with kind of, giving back and contributing more would be now my role with the executive director position for the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission. So with that, the mission for that organization is to promote Italian heritage. And that is done through a K through 12 curriculum, which was developed by this commission, which actually reports into the state of New Jersey. We have an arm with the Department of Education, and we are based out of Rutgers University. And so we are, very much entrenched in the education world. And so our goal is to really get this K through 12 curriculum. It's not language. It's not Italian language, because a lot of times I think folks just kind of default to thinking, we're trying to, push a language, but it's more about the Italian history and heritage. And so this K through 12 curriculum is a very comprehensive kind of structured plan blessed by all the folks in the state of New Jersey. And our goal is to really get this implemented and put into the school systems across New Jersey. So it's a big task. We have a lot of goals and kind of things we want to accomplish in 2025. But as part of being, the personal side of me is a first generation Italian American. So there's always like a lot of controversy when people talk about the generations and, like grandparents and where they stand as the generation of Italian Americans. First off, we are all Americans. I
first and
kind of
foremost,
have to give
that's
that.
absolutely right.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times you might see clips of people talking about things and it's like, you got to understand, yes, we were all, I was born here. I'm an American. My background, my cultural heritage is Italian. My parents are from Italy, from an area of Italy. It's the southernmost tip of the boot. It's called Calabria, Reggio Calabria.
See, we got a lot of guests from that area, and a lot of folks in the Pittsburgh area from that. In fact, I am on the board for the Calabria Club and Friends of Pittsburgh, so very, very well-known area for a lot of us.
Yeah. So, and we still travel. My mother still travels and goes there often. And my sister, my family is there. We actually don't have any like immediate family here. So my parents were the only ones who came to America and stayed.
Wow.
So, yeah. So for us, so I'm very rooted and like my connection is still very close to, going back to Italy, and I speak Italian. I speak dialect.
I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you that. You are probably very fluent in Italian then.
Yeah. So it's a dialect that we grew up on, right? Because my parents are from Calabria, And then, believe it or not, when I went to college, I decided for myself that I wanted to just actually like relearn the Italian language. And being that there's dialects, but there's Italian proper
Right.
language, right? So it's
Firenze.
yeah.
Yeah. See,
Yeah. So
they would speak in Florence for our listeners who are not of Italian nature.
Right. So it's so you really have to kind of like, understand the differences too with like it's like me being from New York and someone being from Georgia, and then when you
Right.
come together, you're like, oh, you have a different accent. So that's kind of like how it is in Italy, right? So when my parents came over, they spoke the dialect, and so when I go back to Italy, which is very interesting, a lot of my cousins and people are always amazed that I speak a dialect because because we're very close in that immigration. Like my parents came over in, 57 and the 60s. So people weren't really doing that immigration trek into the U.S. at that time from Italy, so it was like, it's this very odd kind of thing when you go back and I'm speaking dialect. They just think it's like a time capsule. Like my cousins are like, I can't believe you speak such a tight dialect, but it's,
actually, I want to ask you something about that because you just said something very interesting. Time capsule. There are a lot of people we've interviewed, and I've spoke to a lot of like what I'll call, younger Italians that have come over to the United States. And they have often said that a lot of the Italian Americans here, it's like we're frozen in time. Do you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it, because it's like so let's use my father for an example. So my father came here in 1957. And so how my father kind of was, and, my father passed about 3 years ago, but it's like he had all of like whatever he brought with him from Italy is like how he lived, right? So it's like how he spoke, how he interacted, how he cooked, how he prepared things, how we were like religious and did we go to church. So it was almost like whatever he came here with, like that is
Right.
what we learned. And my mother the same, right? So it's like we are definitely living in that time capsule of like whatever they brought with them. I'm lucky enough that my parents are, were always, fluid with going back and forth. And I grew up like a lot of my summers, I would go there, that was normal. So it is a time capsule because so if I speak to other first generation folks, let's say here, and they're from Calabria, like they, in Calabria, there's actually different like dialects even within Calabria.
Right.
So it's like I could be from like
My relatives are down there too. Yep.
Yeah. And so it's a fascinating, just kind of thought and like process on like how we all kind of, absorbed this time capsule of language, traditions, culture. And, and then if you look at what we are here, right? Like we're American, we live in American culture, but we implement our Italian traditions from home into American culture. For example, it's always the joke when you talk about Thanksgiving dinner, right? And most people are like, oh, what did your nonna make? Lasagna? Because, Italians didn't, Italians from Italy that come here, they're like, wait, you're making a big turkey? Like, what is that for? Because they don't know our full history, of here's American history, right? And this is the traditional Thanksgiving dinner. Here's why. So we kind of had like this clash of, cultures, but we're so assimilated. I think a lot of Italian Americans that call themselves Italian American, like we're very assimilated Americans,
Right.
but we have a lot of these traditions that are definitely time capsule. Like, so if, over Christmas, some people do 7 fishes. That is more of like an Italian American culture.
Absolutely. That's right. That's not necessarily from Italy. In fact, I've asked Italians that, and they look at you like, huh?
Yeah, my cousins were like they'll see like my Facebook postings, or they'll see like who I'm talking to or what I share, and they always say that. They're like, yeah, but I don't understand. Like what does that signify that there's all those fish? Like I'm from southern Italy. Like all we do is eat fish, right? So they're like, but they're like, ma che significa sette like and it's always like this interesting kind of clash of how we grew up here, what we now constitute as Italian American culture. I mean, again, we're American, but it's an integration of our tradition. So there's so much. I mean, it's just fascinating. I was using the word last week of layers because I think, there are many layers. My story of how I grew up Italian American is very different than someone else's story, because you might be, you might take all your traditions and memories and things from like a grandparent who's from another area in Italy, who then kind of gives you some traditions and culture, and you're like, oh, well, that's different than what you guys do. So it's amazing, and we're so lucky, I think, as Italian Americans to kind of like be able to tap into all of these things, because it broadens your brain, in my opinion, and it gives us, an opportunity to really offer other people, an insight into the culture. And it actually kind of, I think it aligns, and it gives people more of like, like we're putting our arms around everybody. I think like the Italian American culture really embraces all other cultures. And I think that's the goal. I think, in my opinion, in the work that we're doing, that I currently do with the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission, it's more about like this cultural inclusivity, like bringing everybody in. It's not about separation and,
right. Not by regions. No. You know what? And it's funny because it's that regional separation. When they came here 100 plus years ago, that was more of a real thing, because they hadn't been unified as a nation that long. In fact, some of the people that immigrated here in the early 1900s were born when it was not Italy. So they came here later in life.
Right.
So that was not. It's a very different Italy 100 years ago from now. But I want to. But I want to talk, because kind of leading to what you're about to talk about. This what we'll call the Italian culture. This group. But I would ask you, and I think this is an easy question, Margaret. What does it mean to be Italian American? And I say that kind of facetiously, but at the same time, it's, you've got people that are far more removed from their immigrant ancestors. And then someone like yourself that says, listen, I was born, but it came in kind of an odd year, because Italy wasn't necessarily, in a dire situation necessarily in late 50s, early 60s, like it was, say, pre-World War I. And then you have Italians that may have come over here in the last 20, 30 years. Maybe they're, more white-collar doctors, lawyers, et cetera. Much farther removed from, 50 years ago, yet alone 100 years ago. Now they come over here. Now either you have, maybe you still have some people that have immigrated over recently. They become Americans. They're going to stay here, or they're here temporarily. But say their kids are born here. Now, what point do you say, well, there's such disparity, number one, between the eras of immigration, think 120 years ago versus 50 years ago versus 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And then there's this disparity between the generations that have followed since. So I think as a community, we got to say, well, what does it mean to be Italian Americans? It's simply somebody in my family came from Italy, therefore I'm automatically Italian American. Well, I guess you could say that by blood, but culturally speaking, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah, and I think, but I think it's a good thought to kind of break down, because this is where I think a lot of folks kind of want to battle this conversation, because sometimes, to your point, you have folks who are very removed from understanding like where they come from in the sense of what their roots are, and then you have the people who are kind of like closer in that timeline, who are very rooted in where they came from. So meaning, when you talk about carrying, it's almost like who are you identity kind of, it's about your identity in a sense. So being Italian American, I think is definitely rooted in family tradition. It's about, what we came from. It's about, in my case, I'll only speak for myself, there's a lot of religious influence too, right? Because that's how we were brought up from a traditional standpoint. So I feel for myself, being Italian American has a lot of different layers to it. There's the heritage, there's the pride of being, I come from Italy in a sense, from, like you said, in a blood perspective, because both of my parents are from Italy. So there's a deep appreciation for the Italian culture, for the history, for the traditions. Let's not forget food. I speak the language, and that was I know there's also an argument about language, right? So it's like, well, what about, you're not really, you can't claim to be more Italian because most Italian Americans don't speak Italian. But, that's not what the history called for at the time either. We also have to have these conversations around the fact that a lot of people who immigrated to the United States, they taught their children not to speak Italian because it was actually Italians were like part of a culture that was actually persecuted in different parts of the country, at different times. There's different stories for that too. Historical, I think, Steve, we need like a couple more episodes to just go.
I'm going to have you back. Don't worry. But no,
okay, great.
But no, for real, because that is important because, everybody wants to, I'm going to take one little detour and I'm going to let you take over again. Everybody wants to go back and go, boo-hoo, bad things happened to my people a long time ago. It's like, get in line. It happened to the Irish. It happened to the Polish. It happened to the Italians. True. It happened to everybody that immigrated over here at some point faced discrimination. I just think that there's a difference between wallowing in it versus saying that happened, but we overcame it. And I think that's the difference between a lot of these different groups. I think Italians don't wallow in it. They overcame it. They said, that happened. We were treated like crap, but whatever. We can't do nothing about it. Move on.
Right. And that's part of the part about Italians or Italian Americans being very assimilated. Italian Americans, I just know that we're more rooted in like just really being prideful about our culture, about our traditions, how we are as people, how we look, or how we, are like the masters of lifestyle. So these are the things that you like to claim and identify with. But yeah, I think that in different timelines of folks who immigrated into the United States, I think it was different for a lot of people, and they might have different feelings, and we have to respect everybody's feelings about how they identify, right? Because I think that has a lot to do with, I think just in general, like even as an American, because I could say, well, I'm from the tri-state area. I'm a proud New Jerseyan, which is true. We're definitely, we get a bad rap in New Jersey.
So you're the one.
We do. We get such a bad rap in New Jersey, but as soon as I'm like coming into Newark Airport and I'm flying from somewhere and I see Newark Airport, I'm so excited. I'm like, I'm home, and I think that's the thing. I think we have to be respectful and have awareness. Awareness is key, awareness and education. And that is the work that I am doing with the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission. Because it's not about this, the word classification also comes up a lot. It's not about that. It's about awareness. It's about history. It's about understanding other cultures. So, I might be very similar to someone else who comes from a different culture. And, just bouncing back to, I was telling you earlier that back in 2008, I started a blog called theitalianamericangirl.com. And it's, you can still visit it, italianamericangirl.com. And on that blog, the goal at the time was to be able to connect. This is before social media and all of those, social sites where everybody's like talking to each other now, and it's very easy. But back then, before social was mainstream, we were out on websites, just kind of like looking at articles, doing Google searches, trying to find other people. So that was my goal at the time, was to really connect with other Italian Americans. But you know what ended up happening? I ended up really connecting with everybody from different cultures from all around the world. And I had folks sending me emails, sending me letters, asking if, I would feature their stories. And they were not particularly Italian American stories. They were of different cultures, like you mentioned before. So, I think that, again, that line, we are all more alike than different. But the blog and what I produced and created over those years back from 2008 till now is really for that awareness and for us to really be more accepting of each other. And that's really the bottom line. Like in the end, fast forward, you and I are having this conversation. And, it's about traditions. It's about celebrating. It's about resilience. And, I think about the world right now, right? Everything's on fire. And it's like, it's not about separating anyone anymore. Right. We got to come together. And that's really, and that's rooted in how I was brought up, you know? So what's the good thing? It's about how I was brought up. And that's my goal.
Well, we're Italians. We definitely have our spirituality and religion is obviously a part of our, of our culture. And like you said, it's part of mine. I'm not ashamed to say I believe I have strong faith, and I try to live it. And I totally understand what you're saying. Folks, don't go anywhere. I'm going to be right back. I got to pay the bills. Margaret, stay on the line. Thanks to Greater Pittsburgh Travel. For any of your travel needs, let Tom and the team at Greater Pittsburgh Travel know, and they'll take care of you. For more information, call 412-331-2244 or visit their website at www.greaterpittsburghtravel.com. For all of your plumbing needs, be sure to try Palucci Plumbing. Nick and the team have decades of experience and will get you back up and running. For more information, call Palucci Plumbing at 412-782-5050. And we want to thank the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. If you're interested in learning more, you can find their contact information on Facebook at Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. Again, thanks Domenica and the team at the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh for your support. And we want to thank La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei, the only nonprofit school in Pittsburgh endorsed by the Italian Consulate. If you're interested in learning Italian or have your children being immersed in the Italian culture and language, be sure to give them a call at 412-404-7070. And that's La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei. We'd also like to thank Chris Gonzalez from the Knights of Columbus. If you have any questions about joining the Knights of Columbus, reach out to Chris Gonzalez at 412-605-9074. All right, welcome back, Margaret. So I want to pick up where we left off because you talked about, one of the, I'll kind of go back. One of the things that I was struggling with, especially when the new year was starting, I was like, you know what? Do I rename the show? And it's kind of a funny thing, but I'll tell you why. I was afraid when it was the fact that it started with Italian was like, oh, okay, if I'm not Italian, it doesn't apply to me. But what I think you learn, I spent a lot of years in the military, so I was overseas a lot. And I got to experience a lot of cultures. And plus, I've traveled a lot and I've lived all over the United States. I've seen a lot of different groups. And what you find is there's some commonalities with everyone, no matter where they're from. There's just certain things that we all want. We all want. Individuals might be what I'll call warmongers and bad people, but generally speaking, there's not a culture in the world that doesn't say, listen, we just want to be left alone. We want peace. We want to be able to raise our kids. We want to have food on the table. We want to. People have the same kind of hopes and desires in a lot of ways. I want something better for my kids. Individuals might think differently, but I'm saying cultures, on general, think that way. And the more you meet people, the more you realize they're not that much different from us, no matter where they're from in the world.
Yeah, right.
So I was debating. I was like, well, do I want to rename the show to make it, a little less, not to scare away anyone that's not Italian? But I said no, because while I do agree that we all have certain commonalities, I also agree that each culture kind of has its own nuances that make it unique, whether it's the food, whether it's the way they dress, whether it's the language, whatever it is, there's some nuance that keeps every culture just, it gives it its, its definitiveness. Even in Italy, you're talking about, the different regions. I had Anna Harsh on here. She does Allegro dance, and she does a lot of tarantellas, and she was explaining, it depends on where you're from in Italy, how they dance. And I thought, well, you know what? There's a lot of truth in that. Again, only 150-something years ago, Italy wasn't the country. It was a bunch of different city-states, slightly different languages, different food styles, different dress. And so even just because they united, say, oh, we're going to put all that away and we're going to be something, we're all going to dress the same act. It doesn't work that way. You don't just throw those customs aside. So when you were, now kind of like fast forward to the kind of work you're doing. Now, it kind of builds off of what I was saying before. So now you're in part of this, kind of historical commission. Says, listen, we want to create a curriculum so that students can understand, quote, Italian culture. How do you capture that? And that's a little different question than what does it mean to be Italian American? I mean, like, how are you capturing this so you can say to the students, well, it depends. You're from the north, south, central. Are we talking 150 years ago, subtle differences? Are we talking now, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And so I'll give you an example of how we capture it and make it relatable to be understood about Italian history and culture, and then as Americans. Because obviously we're here, and I mentioned before, and it's a fact, we are Americans. So we're leading with the fact that we are American. And so the way to understand your roots and the way to understand how this K through 12 curriculum is being positioned and packaged and presented for, students to kind of understand culture and to understand diversity is making it relatable. So the way that it's relatable, we recently just launched a new lesson plan, and it's called The Creation of America, the Roman Legacy. And so inside of this lesson, you get, tons of information about how the United States actually came together, and the historical context of, let's just say, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Congress, how the United States came together, and the influence of all of the, different parts of Roman legacy, let's say. So, if you sign up, you can go to NewJerseyItalianHeritage.org and you sign up. Anyone can access these lesson plans, by the way, not just educators. So the way that we really are trying to capture that relationship and connection is by actually talking about the fact, and this is fact-based, this is, confirmed, researched, blessed by all of the top scholars. And this is to talk about, there is this Roman legacy influence in how certain things were built and developed in our country. And part of what we're talking about now, which is like current Italian-American history, that is now American history. So my parents' immigration story, people who came over in the 1800s and actually built America, that is American history. And so now we're at a point where we have to kind of collectively, my work with the New Jersey Italian Heritage Commission is to talk about the work, which is that, it is now talking about all of those pieces and bringing it together to understand that we are actually talking about American history, because that's where we are. That's who we are. And so it's an interesting conversation, because you could go, like I said, we could talk for hours on this because there's just so many pieces to it. But
I actually am going to have you back, and I'll tell you why. I don't want to cut you off. I apologize,
Great.
but I want to tell you something that you said was incredibly subtle, but I don't think people understand this. The impact, and I'll use the Greco-Roman because the Romans were obviously influenced by the Greeks to some extent. And then the Romans always had a wonderful knack for taking things and either doing something completely different or just making what was there better. So very different time frame, 2,000 years ago. So same things as simple as, running water, the buildings that they built, those were unheard of, and they didn't have computers, but it was like, the Greeks would build an altar or some kind of temple, and the Romans would say, we're gonna pray to the same God, and we're gonna call it something a little different. We're gonna make a bigger temple. We're gonna build coliseums. We're gonna build all these things. So what people don't understand though is everything from architecture to the rule of law that we have in Western civilization goes back to the Greco-Romans. Even after Rome, quote, fell, there were still societies after that kept trying to keep aspects of Roman culture alive because they knew it was good and they didn't want to get rid of it. So our founding fathers, people don't understand, they read about the Roman Empire and the Roman government, and they said, we're going to use some of that, what worked, what didn't work, when we're building our form of government. So to deny, this is the almost, I want to say the ignorance, but to deny the influence of both the Roman Empire and Italians in general, like you said, when they came over here, and what did they do? They got stuck in a lot of construction jobs. Why? Because they were uneducated manual labor. So what did they do? They built. So they built what they knew. And so, that influence is undeniable, but it gets forgotten because we start to kind of just blend everything. It was built 100 years ago. Well, by who? Why? What was I do think there's relevance in that, because I also believe that everything that happened in the past creates a ripple effect that we feel today. So you might not think something's important from 100, 150, 200 years ago, but you are where you are today because of decisions that were made 500 years ago.
Exactly. And so this is where we kind of have to have an open mind. This is the educational part. So we have to kind of open our minds, and I think a lot of people do, of different culture, every culture, and including folks who are just, maybe now just kind of tapping into like, oh, well, you are American, but maybe someone is like part something else in their findings. Like, this is why, you have all these DNA sites. People are just so interested in learning about themselves. They're like,
they want to know who they are. And
Right.
we have cut people's roots off in the last 20, 30 years, especially, I think. And now people are going, and I've had people tell me this: if you don't know who you are, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know who you are. If you don't know who you are, then you don't know what the road in front of you is, and therefore you don't know what you can become because you don't even know where you've come from. And to your point, that's why people are looking backwards, going, "Who am I?"
Right. And, like I keep saying, we are American and I'm a proud American. My father came here, and this is the part about immigration that I think a lot of people sometimes don't kind of tap into, because there's just such a negative connotation around immigration. So when my parents came over, I mean, they went through the process, right? Which, is a very long, laborious, legal process.
I'm married to an immigrant. I know all about that process.
Right. So there is a process, and you have to abide by the process. And, so I have respect for the process. We have respect for the law and how it all works. And, in the United States, my father came here because it was the land of opportunity, and he believed in his American dream. Like, my siblings and I are part of his American dream. And, I pride myself still on all of his thoughts. And, when I created that blog many years ago, my father was really my inspiration for that, because he's the one who had the drive. He believed in coming here. He was, he had a broken accent for 50 years living in the United States as an American citizen, but he was like American. He loved everything about whatever he was doing. And he loved the fact that there was opportunity here. He loved that you could, have different liberties and different things that you don't necessarily get in other areas of the world. So I have respect for it. And as an American, I have tremendous respect as a citizen and for all of the opportunities and the education and whatever I can bring to the table. It's my responsibility to bring the awareness and the education to the table. And that's part of the work. That's what I feel my role is now, as someone who understands their background and where my roots are from. So, it's a very romantic conversation too, because it kind of like starts getting into the heart of things. And it's like, I think about my father and I want to cry, because I just know how deeply devoted he was as an American, even though he was, he came over from Italy. So it's, it's a great conversation, and I just wish like a lot of people could know that more, that there is a positive conversation around immigration, and
That's right.
And
that's right.
And it's a good one.
And I want to throw some out. And again, I stay away from politics, but it is important to note that a lot of these people, two big things, and this is where ignorance is playing such a hurtful part in the state of affairs in this country. Because number one, even 100 years ago, just because you wanted to come to America doesn't mean you got to come to America. There was a process, and people, even from Europe, were sent back. There is a process. It's not the best. It's not the smoothest. Remember, you're dealing with a government. Governments are nothing but bureaucratic machines. But there is a process, and if you follow the process and everything lines up, you come to America. If not, you don't come to America. So that is nothing new. That is nothing new that people were denied access because for different reasons, whether it was health, whether it was financial, not having a sponsor. They're just different reasons, but not everyone could come to America. So it's not like that's something new. I'm going with what you said to respect the process. And two, this is the biggest thing. When they came here, they wanted to be Americans. They weren't coming here just to take. These people were going to come here and they were going to work hard and they were going to give and they were going to raise their kids to be Americans. And I think that is lost in immigration. And I think that's what frustrates people. To your point, is now if you question, quote, immigration, it's, you just don't want people to come here. It's like, no, I'm very aware of the process. Like I said, I married an immigrant and I had her mother and brother come over here. So I've been through that waiting in line process. We're talking decades ago, when you literally didn't do things online because there was no online. This is like the 90s.
Right.
So I used to stand in line. So I know the process. That's number one. And number two, we've all had somebody that came here And they probably had to go through that same process, fill out their paperwork, make sure they had a sponsor, get on that boat, sail over here. But that is kind of what we're talking about. There's a big gap of knowledge that's lost because when they came here, especially way back when, they said, my kids are going to be American. So they didn't necessarily teach them their culture. And think what was deprived now. They didn't learn the language. They didn't learn all the tradition. Right. And so now you've got this big gap. And what happens was now you've basically cut the root a little bit because now they don't feel, their kids aren't going to feel that connection to their great grandparents in their country of origin. Again, there's a big difference between saying who am I loyal to and who am I reverent to. Like you said, hey, I'm born in the United States. I served 20 years in the military. I retired a military officer. I'm proud of the country. I love my country and all that. I've proven it. But it doesn't mean I can't love my culture and where my great grandparents came from.
Oh, exactly.
And that's what people got to learn to differentiate. And again, just because you want to come here doesn't mean you should. Because, there's only, we're like all countries. There's only a finite amount of resources in every country. Now, we've been very blessed, but one kind of final thought, and again, as you're teaching this, it's not like America was always a prosperous nation. We've been poor before too. And so, and that's why it's so important to recognize our distant relatives, because when they came here, they had to work very hard from poverty into poverty to get out of poverty. And all America did was give them the chance.
Exactly. And, that's exactly my father's story, right? Because he came here, he had no money. He left Italy because he wanted a better life where he could actually prosper. And so I don't ever remember a time when my father didn't have more than let's put it this way. He always had up to 3 jobs at all times, at all times. And he didn't really retire. He never stopped. He kept going, and he felt it was necessary. He felt that was his role. That was his job, is to make sure that he was doing the most he could and providing and contributing where he could. And that is part of the story, which is important. It's in the story, in the storytelling, and the awareness and the education. I think that can help other generations understand who they are or what they come from and why. Why folks came over here.
No, that's right. And again, we can't forget our past. Doesn't mean we're not proud of where we are, but it helps us understand why we are where we are and why that's important to know. Margaret.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to give you the final word, and let the listeners know where can they find out more about you and where can they follow you.
Yeah. So thanks, Steve. This was an amazing conversation. And like I said, we could probably talk for like hours on
You'll be back. Don't worry.
Yeah, great. I'll be excited too. And so you can find me at margaretfontana.com. And then if you're interested in learning about the work and the educational content that the state of New Jersey is working on, which is part of their K through 12 curriculum on Italian heritage and culture, follow or actually go to njitalianheritage.org, and you can go to that website and you can access all of our free resources. And if anybody wants to have a conversation or ask any questions, feel free to reach out through the Contact Us. It goes directly to me, and the commission would be happy to chat with anyone who has questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Margaret. I want to thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
This was very enlightening because I didn't realize you had so much going on. I peeked at you and looked you up a little bit, obviously. And, obviously, and I mean this sincerely, anybody that takes time out of their schedule to spend time with me, that is truly appreciated. I also appreciate the fact that my listeners take time out of their lives to listen to me. Yeah. So, again, that is something that means something to me. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. I appreciate all of it. And, thank you to your listeners. And, I'll look forward to seeing some comments and, connecting with everybody online once we post our episode.
Awesome. And again, the contact information will be down in the description. So folks, take a look down in the description. You can click on those links. And I encourage you to check this out. Again, any free resource to learn about your culture, never pass it up. It's a good thing. Margaret, again, I want to thank you one more time. I want to thank my listeners all over the world. I thank you all for putting up with me in my terrible cold that, God willing, will be gone here in about a week. It's only been 3 weeks, so I got to keep suffering
Feel
through
better.
Thank you very much.
Feel
all
better.
All right, folks. Happy New Year, and we will see you again in a week or so. Take care.